Are you playing to win or just running out the clock? In sports, the game clock drives every decision. It creates urgency, sharpens focus, and pushes players to perform their best. So what if you treated your life with that same sense of urgency? I've created an exercise to help you do just that. It's called Your Game Clock. Download Your Game Clock today at bill-burke.net/clock. It's free, it's simple, yet transformative, and it could be the first step towards achieving peak performance in the areas of your life that matter the most. Remember, life isn't a practice run. Every second counts, and your time is now. Welcome to another episode of the Fortitude Forum. I am so excited to welcome in a new friend of mine. We've actually never met in person, Casey, but we've had several conversations now. We're on opposite sides of the country. He was a rock star in the corporate sales world. He's now a keynote speaker. He's a sales trainer and coach, and he is an author as well of the awesome book, Win the Relationship, Not the Deal. And he is Casey Jacox. Casey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It's good to be on again. It's I feel like this is like the home and away from a golf perspective. I come to your course, you come to mine, and we will meet in person one day, hopefully. That's
right. Hey, Michigan State's in the Big Ten, of course. Washington is now in the Big Ten. There's going to be an opportunity, I think, somewhere. I can feel it.
It's like the Big 46 now. I lost track of how many teams are in that thing now.
Yeah, nobody's ever said, hey, this is it. We're done adding teams, so there probably will be more. I love having you here because you're such an interesting guy, and I love how you approach what you do and the work that you do and the inspiration that you bring to people as well. And I know you started off in the corporate sales world. So talk to me a little bit about, is there or do you see parallels between your former life in the sales world and what you're doing now with speaking and coaching? Yeah. How have you connected the dots in the last several years with those two worlds?
I think the biggest way I've connected them is through stories. My equation for leadership or great relationship building is and I work with people and I don't give them the answer. I ask questions first to try to make them think, which is H plus C plus V equals leadership, or H plus C plus V equals relationship building. And I think those letters stand for humility, vulnerability, and curiosity. And so like when I was present and thoughtful about being humble, which is us quarterbacks must be, if we're vulnerable to say, hey, I need some help, I don't understand that coverage, coach, or hey, I don't know what to say when the manager says this, or curious just to learn more about someone's business, I was a way better seller. When I was humble, vulnerable, and curious, I was a way better leader. And so I think I still use those now as an executive coach or sales coach or even speaker, is try to immediately humble the room through my own failure or my own gaps. And I love telling stories when I sucked or when I was not my best, so that they realize, because I think it's easy when you hear someone speak, like, oh, he or she must be really good. I'm like, I'm human just like you. And I always tell people, even like with my book I wrote, I read the thing 10 times, not because I'm an egomaniac, just through the editing process, or when I'm working with someone coaching, I'll reread a part of the book. I'm like, wait a minute, I just learned from myself, which reminds me that I have gaps just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so I think, like, for me, I think the parallels are just staying so psychotically focused on those three words. And then I find when I do, I'm a way better dad, I'm a way better presenter, I'm a way better coach, because I don't have to be smartest in the room. I just have to ask really good questions and make people think, and they'll end up coaching themselves, or just like in sales, the client will sell themselves.
Give us the words again. Give us the formula and then the words again.
Yep. So H plus C plus V equals leadership. And to me, that means when I'm humble, when I'm vulnerable, when I'm curious, I think I'm going to create the best cultures, at least in my humble experience. I'll give you an example. If you're a leader out there listening right now and you're like, what's this guy talking about? If you think about your last sales meeting or your last leadership meeting, you as the leader, were you talking the most, or were you asking more questions? Were you asking follow-up questions? Because I've found when you don't do that as a leader, fear loves to hide. And when fear hides, your culture is eroded, egos start blocking growth. Maybe you start dealing employee churn. Maybe your sales funnel gets weak because you're scared to say, God, that deal I have sucks. I don't know what to do. Versus, so humility plus vulnerability plus curiosity equals leadership. And I think those same three skill sets create the best salespeople to create the best relationships for their growth, regardless of whatever product or service you're selling.
As in the game of sales, there's many sales professionals out there listening, and they make up such a huge part of the workforce, right? Every company out there needs some division of the company that is responsible for sales. And sales is a game really of resilience. We can draw a parallel right there between sales and the sports world. You've got to have resilience to be successful or even compete in both. So tell the listeners, if you would, was there a time during your sales career where you faced a lot of huge obstacles, or maybe one in particular, and you had to call upon that resilience trait that maybe you learned as an athlete? And what did that look like? How did you respond, and how did that play out?
Did you say time or times?
Just one.
I'm
If one
joking.
pop, I know there's probably hundreds. If one pops out, though, that stands out, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the resilience, I can think of stories for days. I think probably the one that's most impactful is at the end of my corporate career. I was a part of a team. We were I was executive sponsor for one of our largest customers. And we had a multi-month pursuit after this big deal, hitting multiple business units, cross-functional selling. So again, skill set of quarterback. It's like you're moving coverages, you're moving people in motion. You're reading the defense. Same thing in corporate. I was doing the same skill, just different, without pads and helmet. And we were in the staffing and consulting space, and we literally won this project that was like a 100-person deal, and it was a multi-million-dollar deal. And we were like, oh my! We thought it was going to change everything, and everyone's going to be just like career growth, amazing. 3 months later, I'm meeting with the executive sponsor, and she's like, hey, Case, we got a problem. We got a financial problem. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, there's a funding issue, and all those people we just onboarded, we got to lay off like 80 of them. I'm like, that's pretty funny. She's like, I'm serious. I'm like, deep breath. Uh-oh. Now, as a publicly traded company where I worked out, I'm thinking this is going to impact earnings. This could impact my mind just went to immediate, uh-oh. But then I realized, okay, not my fault. I didn't wake up saying, I hope they messed up. So just as a quarterback, we get too much glory, too much failure or blame. Same thing in business. Sometimes salesperson says, oh man, you did everything. No, there's a team behind me that did it. And sometimes when things go wrong, it's not like I was the one that made the financial error. The client did. What am I going to do about it? I can't control it. All I can control is how I show up, how I serve, how I communicate with my team, how I set expectations, how I over-communicate, how I ask for help. And I remember asking one of my leaders at the time, I told him what was happening. I said, hey man, I'm freaking out. I didn't have control over this, but we got to get ahead of this. And he said, Case, take a deep breath. We'll get through it. And then I think again, that was me being vulnerable, ask for help. Because if I kept it inside, I would have been just anxious and it would have just eroded and ate at me. But once I got it out of my body, my mind, and out into the world, it's like, okay, we're still breathing. The sun came up the next day. I'm okay. And the story, maybe probably 6 months later, once we went through this, the client said, Case, the day you won it and the day you lost it, you're the same guy. Thank you. And even 6 months after that, when she told me, they actually did end up doing what's called a vendor consolidation, where they reduce the numbers from vendors they work with from 5 down to 2, and then really down to 1. And who do you think they chose? Us, because of how we showed up, how we dealt with that adversity. And I pull on that story of resilience, though, Bill, and I think back to my injury in high school that sent me to the Division II route. And I'm 48 years old. I still think about that injury often. I'm like, if I got through that and it was a blessing, and even though I got through this corporate stuff and it was a blessing, those moments they create stories for us to reflect on, and they also create stories to share with others to help hopefully inspire them that A, you're not alone, and B, there's probably someone who's got it way worse than you out there, and then C, we'll get through it. Just you got to communicate, you got to ask for help, and don't let your ego get in the way.
That's a great story. Do you think that your response in that corporate situation was directly related to that injury that you just brought up? Were there other factors at play? How did you know to have that perspective in that moment after the initial 30 seconds of freaking out a little bit? Because a lot of people would go into a shell and maybe go the other way. So how do you connect those, or what else was brought into it? Was it an influence from a parent? Most people don't have that calm in the pocket, so to speak. Just elaborate on that a little bit if you've reflected on what other factors were at play.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think definitely parents for sure, but I think of athletics for sure. But I think about a quote a piece of advice one of my leaders told me at 23 years old, my very first job at a school. And he asked me, he goes, Casey, I'm gonna ask you a question. He says, do you want to be right or do you want to get what you want? What's more important to you? And I said, I want both. He's like, you can't. You got to pick one. I'm like, okay, shoot. Okay, I want to get what I want. He's a good answer. Because if you just said, I want to be right, that tells me your ego's in the way. And maybe this is not the best spot for you because we don't want egomaniacs. We want people who can put away their ego aside. Maybe you might not be right or you might not get all the glory, but if the team wins, we're going to win. So in my mind, that kind of same mindset, that piece of advice hit me in that moment where me being right, I can try to convince myself that this is going to work itself out. I can convince myself that I didn't do anything wrong, or I can convince myself that just hope and pray and cross my fingers, or getting what I want is a better outcome. A way to protect my team, protect the consultants that were working for us, protect our company. And I had to ask for help. And I think sometimes people, like they pretend these bad things aren't happening, and they want to just wait for a little bit. But my mind is, when in doubt, over communicate, ask for help. And I've always been obviously the injury brought a lot of humility and vulnerability. That's where I learned, I'd say, the power of vulnerability and humility, and realizing that we all are replaceable. And I also joke with sales teams now. I was the number one producer at this company for 10 years. When I left, they didn't go out of business. Miracle. And half the people there, they probably have no idea who I am. Who cares? So I think these moments of just like staying grounded, staying humble, realizing that I could be as good or elite as I am today, the clock starts tomorrow. It's as quarterback's next play up. Great, I just hit a 3rd and 17, big stop route for a first down. Great. Get in the huddle. Play clock's running right now. What are we going to do at the next play? So I think just that mindset of just intense humility, intense vulnerability, always keeping my ego checked. And when I feel my ego getting in the way, I almost like self-talk myself. I'm like, hey, bro, let's chill out. Like, why is your ego because you messed up somehow, or you messed up, but I don't know. Sometimes I just try to self-reflect, and maybe it is uncommon, but I feel like these skills anybody can learn. You just has to be intentional and really lean into what I'm saying is maybe hitting home for somebody. You can change too. You just gotta maybe find a mentor, find a friend, find a leader in your company, and just share with what's important to you, and then put the word I will in front of it, and watch what like a forward-thinking mindset can do to someone who wants to change.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I don't want to gloss over what you said earlier about the relationship that you had with that company and how it came back around and you finally did get a deal put together with them eventually. Was that kind of the driving force of illuminating this idea that it's more about the relationship than it is about getting that deal? Did that play a factor in you having the motivation to write that book, Win the Relationship, Not the Deal? Because that's really what I want to dive into here a little bit. There's so many great points and simple, and I love how simple it is in the book just to educate sales professionals on really what it takes. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. That relationship that you had and the traits that you exhibited to that person in that particular tough moment obviously had a big impact on coming back around and ultimately getting you guys the deal.
Without a doubt. I think that it definitely was another example of relationships over transactions, because if you win relationships, there's going to be deals to follow. It actually started, I'd say, probably 6-7 years before that, when the idea first hit me. I always tell the story of, do you remember Christmas Vacation? Obviously one of the best movies ever.
Of course.
And when Griswold goes in the forest and he sees his tree and it glows.
Yeah.
That's when I first said the phrase, we have to win the relationship, not the deal. That's it. That's the name of the book. And so how it started, I was traveling to Dallas. This is like back in, I'd say, 2013, 2014-ish. And I was like, I'll call it like the big brother. Like I was traveling down from Seattle to Dallas to help get up our Dallas team running on working with one of our largest customers. And there was a younger group of folks who less experienced. And I was like the leader of the team. So I said, hey guys, my expectation is we're going to win every deal, but you're not going to win every deal. But you have the mindset is you're going to compete like you're going to win every deal. But most importantly, I expect you to win people. And I said that and they just like blank stare. What are you talking about? I said, let's think about it. So this, again, example of curiosity, making people think. I said, imagine if we lose a consulting deal. Like this company hires consultants from a different company versus our company, so we lose. Now we're bummed. But imagine if I follow up with that customer and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, thanks for the chance to compete and help. I'm bummed that our company wasn't able to get it done, but I want to make sure that the consultants you hired from this other company, are ramping up, are doing everything they're supposed to do. And I want to make sure that you had a great experience with that other vendor. Now, two things would happen when I did that. Either the client would say, "What's funny, Casey, I haven't even heard from the company we gave the business to. Thanks for following up. Yeah, I'll let you know." Or they'd say, "What's funny, Case, thanks for following up. The people that we hired, one guy didn't show up. Is your guy still available?" Or, "They're not ramping up like we thought. I think we want to, if your consultants are still available, I want to give them a chance." Now, if I don't follow up, that doesn't happen. And so I said, that is a perfect example of when we win a relationship with somebody, not the deal. And again, when I said, I was like, that's it. And so it just stuck to me. And it just, again, simple common sense, but yet most people don't think about it, I'm learning. And to your point about the simplicity of the book, I think hopefully the problem it solves is so often multiple whether you're Gen X, Gen Y, whatever you are, people are told to build relationships. Hey, we got to grow a relationship, we got to grow business, we got to build relationships, but most people don't slow down to think how. And really, that was one of my goals. Was okay. So when I was at the top of my game, these are the 6 things that I have control over that will dramatically impact the positivity of a relationship or environment through 25 years plus of business experience and athletics. I've yet to see when those things aren't present, bad things happen. Good things always happen when I do those things. I know that's what top of mind, how to best answer that one.
So give me the 6 things that everyone needs to do to build those solid relationships. What are the 6 things in the book?
I think for chapter 1 is all about bringing energy. Treat people the way you want to be treated. So as a quarterback, if we come into the huddle, what do you guys think about maybe doubles right, gold X? That doesn't sound, but I'm like, hey, let's go. 3rd and 2, we got this. Here you go, doubles right, gold X on 2 and 2, ready? It's like you're saying with confidence. Same thing in business. If you enter a Zoom, a Teams, in-person meeting with energy versus being the vacuum and suck it out, like you set the tone for what's going to happen in that meeting. And those that are positive, people like hanging around positive people. Doesn't have to be fake. Just bring positivity, and that's a choice. You have control of that, everybody. Chapter 2 is about expectation management. Many times expectations sit in our head. When we communicate them through communication, then they become an agreement, which actually creates people moving forward. As a seller, we always can set expectations. Hey, I'm going to be late. Or, hey, you might see me look down to take notes. Or, hey, I know we said that the product's going to ship on March 3rd. It's going to ship on March 4th. Apologize. Set expectations internally, externally. Chapter 3 is about the difference between listening and hearing. I always say listening is conscious. Hearing is conscious. Hearing is subconscious. Listening takes a conscious focus. Most sellers are not good listeners. They're already thinking about what they want to say. So I teach sellers to listen and then ask follow-up questions. Tell me more. Describe why that would be important to you. Tell me what would happen if you didn't achieve that goal, Mr. and Mrs. Client. Chapter 4 is about documentation. Most salespeople I've found do not like using their CRM. They think it's there for their manager to micromanage them and be in their business. And it's, or sellers will say, I don't have time. And I love telling this story because not only was I the number 1 producer at this company, I was also the number 1 user of the CRM, and they tracked both. So you either can be the victim of your own story, salespeople, and keep telling yourself this unrealistic thought that's not true, or you can check your ego and think, okay, wait, maybe I just don't know how to be effective with my CRM. How can I maybe I need some coaching. Maybe I need to find a way to get better at it. Chapter 5 is about ego, keeping it checked at all times. Bring your authentic self to every meeting. In that chapter, we talk about asking for help. We talk about don't fake it till you make it. To me, I think it's the worst advice when leaders say you got to fake it till you make it. One man's opinion, I just disagree with that because I think you're being someone you're not. The client's or customer's gonna see it. And lastly, patience. Relationships take time. It's just like when you build a house. If you build a house really quick, that first windstorm or that first earthquake ain't gonna withstand. But if you take your time, you build it, make sure the cement's poured, you make sure that windows are tight. Like when that first storm comes, you're gonna be warm. Same thing in business. So just let these relationships take time. And so at the end of each chapter, there's exercises for kind of self-reflection and real life examples of my own failure, a few years of my success. And I don't know, it's something that I'm very, very passionate about. I still use a lot of these best practices myself in my own business now that I did not mean to start on accident. But yeah, people want to check it out. I'd be honored to have them read it.
Yeah, you go out and get it. It's a great book. It's you'll be surprised at how simple it is. I think again we overcomplicate the whole pursuit of success, but especially in sales, these are just some really straightforward, easy principles that anybody can execute. And speaking of sales, you can't talk about sales or success for that matter without talking about rejection. And in sales, it is so prevalent. So what's needed for that? This show is all about mental toughness. This show is all about resilience and how you build that. So in your sales career, maybe let's turn it to the listeners a little bit. Give them some advice or one piece of advice that you need to have in place in order to develop that mental toughness, that mental fortitude to deal with the constant rejection, because you will be rejected in sales far more than you will be accepted.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing I work on most with people, so hopefully rejection happens less, is selling is about asking great questions. Selling is not about telling people what you do. Selling is about talking in third person, like from a customer's perspective, not telling people what we do, how I do it, this is what we do. Selling is about telling great stories. And if you're new to your company, don't use that as an excuse. Find someone who's got more experience than you and learn their stories. Make their stories yours for how you solved a problem for whatever your product or service does for your customer. I think when people get their message tight, they're really clear on their ideal customer profile. They're really tight on what problems do we solve? How do we solve these problems differently or better than our competition? That gives me confidence. I think the word behind me here is believe. I would tell sellers, if you don't slow down to think and ask yourself, hey, do I believe what I do matters? I'd ask yourself that every day. As much as this signs up for my clients when they get coaching by me, it's selfishly for me. So I get to continue to see when I'm on these calls because it reminds me that I believe what I do matters. And when I believe what I do matters, it gives me the confidence to call anybody, say anything to anybody because I genuinely believe I can help them. And if they don't need help or they don't want to talk to me, that's all right. There's a billion more people out in the world that I could talk to. And I try to keep it like a game. Like I'm looking to make friends, right? And that's all really it is. And I think when you focus so much on what's not happening for you and you get so wrapped up into that, then I think the mind goes the wrong way. And one stat I've learned throughout this journey is the number of thoughts we have a day. Some science or brain science say like between 80 and 90,000 thoughts a day. So if we think about that, imagine as a seller, well, that's a lot of thoughts. Some could be negative, some could be positive. They also say that of those thoughts, about 75 to 80% are negative. The client's never going to call me back. I'm never going to hit my budget. I can't get that meeting. Man, my boss hates me. When did they ever say that, everybody? So again, if you at least these stats are out there, science might be already against me, but if I can focus on writing, maybe starting with the belief, writing your goals down with, I will call 40 people today. I will bring positive energy to each call. I think just start and warm your brain up, like your mind up before you start the day. Don't be the person that sprints, if you're working from home still, don't be the person that sprints down the stairs at 7:56 for the 8 a.m. meeting. Like, no, log in at 7:50. What questions do I have prepared? How have I researched the company? What's going on in their industry? Am I ready to ask a question, and whatever they say, am I ready to say, tell me more about that? Because when I use that from a resilience or grit perspective, like the number of times I've asked someone to say, tell me more, they keep talking. And as a seller, that's our goal. If we're doing all the talking and they're not, probably the meeting's not going as well as you think. But if you're asking some questions and you hear the client say, man, great question, right? Or if you, again, maybe another thing to think about, Bill, is our email messaging. Maybe you're stuck in a rut where you're not getting them on the phone, so you're just sending email after email. Well, maybe we should ask for help. Find someone internally. Who's having success? Copy their email. Make it yours, though. I think so often sellers focus on things they don't control, and they love to either be the victim of their own story or the hero of their own story. But we can stay like at cruise altitude, like in an airplane. Don't keep ascending or descending up and down. Like your passengers are not going to like it. They're not going to have a good experience back there. And those passengers are your brain. So if we're going up, down, no, just get to 35,000 feet, hit autopilot, and just know that I'm going to be my best on this call. And once that call's over, don't let one bad call lead to two bad calls. And don't let two bad calls lead to half the day, and then half the day leads to 2 days, and all of a sudden 2 bad days led to a bad week, and all of a sudden, shit. Now I'm just
Yeah.
kind of go full circle. Why that's the humility, vulnerability, and curiosity are so important, because to me, they get me out of those funks when I fall into them.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, you mentioned the fake it till you make it. We have a little insecurity in those situations. So it's so much easier to ask questions and have people talk about themselves. I wrote in my book, not just in sales, but in life. Life is about not having all the answers, but asking the right questions. And when you do that, man, you really uncover a lot of great details. You really get to the heart of really what's important to people. And ultimately, of course, you're going to have more success as well. So I love that approach. We are definitely on the same page with asking the right questions. And much like in your book and mine, at the end of every chapter, there are questions for the readers to reflect on. I think that's really important for readers, not just to consume, but to reflect. And how do you do that? Through the right questions. So I want to also add for the listeners that Casey is not just a coach and a speaker and an author, but he's also a podcast host. He's got a show called the Quarterback DadCast. And when I think about mental toughness and I think about my own family and parenting, and that's what your show is centered all the way around. And I really wanted to get your thoughts and your perspective on the types of mental toughness that go into raising kids, having a family, trying to balance your own mental fortitude at the same time, instilling that in your kids and being a leader of your family. So what are your thoughts on how those two worlds collide?
I'm going to say the same 3 words: humility, vulnerability, and curiosity. I use those as a dad every single day, and I want to say thanks to you for you were our first, I think our only 2-time guest. Everybody, I had Bill on maybe season 2, and then when he told me he was going to write a book, I said, when are you going to write it? And I said, when that thing gets published, we're going to come on, we're going to promote it. And he held his end of the bargain. That was fun to get to know you a little bit. But I think as dads, again, ego. If our kids see us as like this perfect, I'm not saying don't be strong, and I'm not saying don't protect your family or go lead them, but sometimes when your kids realize that, hey, you make mistakes too. And sometimes when your kids can hear, hey, when were you scared, Dad? Hey, when you have a bad day, what do you do? Or I think about the journey of the sports world is for parents. In some cities, cultures, if I'm not on the AAA travel team that's going to go to Japan and Russia and Jamaica in 3rd grade, I'm going to be done. Like that, which is such an asinine thing that's happening to youth sports. I got definitely thoughts on that. But so often as a dad, you got to, I think, just slow down and ask more questions, just like we do in selling. And when you can get your kids to communicate, and there's a framework I teach in my business world called TED, which stands for Tell Me, Explain, Describe. I use TED-based questions all the time with my kids. So for example, if I said, hey, Ryder, tell me, how was your day? Well, good. What'd you do? Nothing. Those are bad questions. But if I say, hey, Ryder, tell me 2 things that are making school challenging and 2 reasons that you're making it fun. And whatever he says, I can say, man, tell me more about that. Or describe what would change that. It's like these follow-up questions. So as parents, I just think it's about consistency. And selfishly, I run a podcast for free therapy. So I've interviewed almost 300 dads, and every dad I interview, I'm learning best practices from them. I'm like, maybe I'll try that. Like I shout out to this guy named Matt Miller. I learned a question from him. He said, he asks his family every couple weeks. He goes, tell me how I can be a better dad this week.
That question.
Or tell me how I can be a better husband this week.
I'm going to use that today.
Yeah. You'd be amazing. And then put a number in front of it, because then they have to answer. But if you keep it too open, then they won't. But hey, tell me one way I can be a better dad this week. And you might say, hey, more ice cream. Perfect. Got it down. But you said something a second ago before we talked about the podcast is I think about questions as like this is a dorky dad joke analogy, but think about like a custodian. And a custodian working in a school or a hospital or a building, they have keys to everything. So those keys are on your hip. So if we take the metaphor, the visualization, I could be a custodian too, but instead of keys, these are like a keychain full of questions that I can ask anybody at any given time. And when we ask the right question, it unlocks the right door. And when you ask the right question and you then shut the up and let it sit, that's where relationships change, because now you're allowing for critical thinking skills. Same thing with business, same thing with your kids. And then I think the other thing with parenting that I've loved from this journey of podcasting. It's creating space and meet your kids where they are. Not what you think they should be doing or what you think they are not doing. And I've interviewed so many dads. You're a great one, I think, about from a guy named Swen Nader, who wrote a book called You've Not Taught Until They Have Learned. He played for Bill Walton. He's played for John Wooden. Books on relationship building, on diversity, which is like a hot topic right now. I could think of dads for days, but yeah, I'm very passionate about it because I'm far from the perfect dad, but I work hard to be at least a good one every day I can. So my kids feel open to talk, ask me for help, be able to share their fears, their dreams. And that's our goal. Is, if we create better humans, create better experiences than we had. And if you do that, your world's going to be a better spot.
From what you learned from the dads on your podcast, what advice would you give to the dads listening out there on, because I struggle with this too sometimes, and I've got to get better at this and do it more often. But I heard somebody say, sometimes you just need to say to your kids, do you want me to give you advice or do you want me to just listen? How do you govern yourself when the dad in you with all this knowledge and experience wants to give advice? And how do you step back from that and know and feel out when your kids just need somebody to vent to?
That's where my business skills take over. So in selling, if I convince my son to do something, or if I convince him to do something, or my daughter, that's my idea. But if I ask great questions to make them think, or to ask great questions about what their goal they told me was important to them, they're going to sell themselves or they're going to change themselves. And so I just focus on, it's called the Socratic method of leadership. I'm summarizing. It's, in theory, you're never going to give them the answer. You're just going to ask questions. And then when you do that, and then you create space for them to try their best to, the first thing, they can't say, I don't know out of the gate. They have to at least try. And then once you get them a spot where they're struggling a little bit, because I always say the learning's in the struggle, but there's sometimes, to your point, like sometimes you got to tell them the answer, right? And so maybe I think what you just said is a great question. Do you want me to tell you what I think? Do you want me to coach you? Or do you want me to just listen to be a dad? And then but if you ask that, I think you got to create space for them to listen. And then I think there's the follow-up in us dads. Are we just going to let that moment go? Or if you see changes, then I think you got to then you build them up, break them down model where you, hey, good job. I know we talked about this a couple days ago, and I remember you said this, and I've seen a great change. Great job. And then maybe a TED-based question. Tell me how we're doing with this. And get them to think differently. But I guess long-winded answer, Bill, I'd say there's not a manual to be the perfect dad. I think we're all doing our best, but I think when you lean in more on curiosity and not having smartest in the room syndrome, it creates for more healthier environments, I've found.
Tell me one thing that you are the most curious about lately. What's at the front of your mind? What are you looking to learn? What's Casey curious about today?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's like how to navigate. I have a kid playing sports in college. I got a junior in high school that wants to play in college. Just curious to what is the best way to support them. And what is the best way to realize that I have no eligibility left and it's not my journey, it's theirs, and just stay curious with letting them know that we don't know your path yet, but that's okay. And staying curious with learning from others. Take, for example, I'm interviewing a guy later today that both kids went through the transfer portal. Learning about, how did that happen? How did that impact him? So I think for me, it's just staying curious at this stage of life to be the best dad I can be with kids going through, one in college playing sports and one about to get there, and just making sure I do the right things, say the right things, or ask the right questions.
So many great pieces of advice. I really appreciate you being here, Casey. Tell everybody how they can get the book, how they can work with you, how they can follow and connect with you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think I'm very active on LinkedIn, so if people want to find me there, they can, my name's just Casey, last name Jacox, Jacox. That's my website too, just caseyjacox.com. The book is on Amazon and Kindle, paperback, and on Audible. I narrated it myself, which was a very fun experience to go through. If people, I guess my website's the best place if you want to learn more about the speaking I've done. There's customer testimonials, the coaching as well. But the book is on Amazon, and that's probably the best way to go ahead and get it. And lastly, I'll say, if you're a dad and you want to listen to the podcast, episodes come out every Thursday morning. We're on YouTube now. We do video, but we're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you consume your podcast. They come out every Thursday morning. So that's where you can get them there.
Awesome stuff, man. My goal for the day is to become the first 3-time guest on your podcast.
Let's go.
So hopefully that happens this year at some point. I'm going to leave everybody else in the dust at just one appearance.
The three-peat. I love it.
All right, Casey, take care. Best of luck. And thanks so much for being here.
You bet, man.